Hi, I'd like to show you how to run the demo for the Blender Takes script, which basically generates all the passes needed for this animation. And you can see the final product when you click here compared to the actual viewport. And there's also a contact sheet with all the generated passes. Just download the zip file, and then you have to be aware that the blend file that's included, it's only 133 bytes. That is because it's tracked as a LFS, large file storage file in Git, which means it's not included in the download. So to get the actual file, just click on the file, and then here you have the download button, and this will give you the full 12 megabyte. So how do we run this demo? Just scroll down to demo file. You will find a CLI command that you can copy and run in this folder where the demo blend file lives. If we just run this, it will open up Blender in the background and generate all the takes that come out of this file. You can see that it generated this output folder. Inside there's another one called with the same name as your work file, and inside here are all the generated takes saved as separate blend files. Let's take a look at where the takes are actually defined. For that, you have to open your work file, the demo.blend file. This file was saved in some state, and it doesn't really matter what you do with the file. It won't change the output unless you're not really careful, but you can just browse and unhide stuff, whatever you want to do. The actual take definition is inside a text block. So let's go over to the scripting tab, scripting workspace, and in here you have the text data block that's called takes. And that's important. It's actually looking for a data block with the name takes. So this is like by convention needs to be called takes. And in here you have the actual take definitions. A take is nothing more than a Python function that is prefixed with take underscore. And all the stuff in here is run by the CLI script and then saved out as a blend file with the name of the definition. It's important to understand that you do not want to call this function inside this file. So nowhere in here you will find calls to the actual takes. I'll show you later why that is, because takes can also be destructive, because you can do whatever you want with it. So you could delete stuff, and you don't want to do that in your work file. Let's look at the basic anatomy of a take, and I will show you in a minute where these functions come from, because they're not in this file. But first of all, let's see like a high-level overview. What's it doing? First of all, some setup for the take. This handles stuff like scenes and view layers. If you have several scenes, it actually breaks it down to just one scene with one view layer, and it resets the view layer that's existing. So whatever you set up here will be gone. You have to do that in the script if you want to, in this function. If you want to say, I want the normal path, you would have to write it in there, which is easy because, well, you can probably, most of the time, you can just grab it from down here and paste it in here. Okay, then comes some render definition. This is, you'll find this in several takes. Basically, this is what render engine and the settings. Set range takes two names for markers, timeline markers, and sets the input and output. I think that's really a nice thing. You don't have to deal with the numbers. You can actually just look at your animation and decide from here where your in and out markers should be. So this timeline is full of stuff, and you have to zoom in to actually read all of them. But this is how you drive the in and out points of your take. And now comes the most important thing. What's the best way to make sure undesired stuff does not show up? And that is by first hiding everything. Turn everything off so it's just black. When we render this, it's just black. And now go through a list of things that you want to actually show. This function takes a list of collection names and shows them. And you can call this over and over again for all the collections that you want to make visible in the rendering. Another definition takes existing light groups and adds it to that take. So you can have light groups that are in take A but not in take B. And here you can decide what world data block has to be used for the background. And this is pretty much the standard setup for a take. You can do most of this stuff with view layers in Blender already, but it's important to understand that you can do much more, because you can, whatever Python gives you, whatever power Python gives you inside Blender, you can do in a take. First, let's look at where these functions come from, because they're not defined in this script. These are utility functions that I defined in an external file. This file is called utils.py, and it's sitting in the demo. It's right next to where this demo blend file is in the folder. And it's brought in through these two lines, and this way we have access to the functions defined in that file. Here we have all the things that I showed you in the take definition, but here's some little bit of some comments that describe the function. So this should be called all the time, because it cleans up the whole scene and the view layer situation. And then here's all the stuff that is useful in the take. Hide all collections in render, show a list of collections. This is the code. You can of course go in and make this code a little bit much better than what I have written. I have some things in here that are not included in the takes in the demo, but just look at this util script and you'll get the idea. Clear materials takes also a list of collections and clears all the slots. Make it not visible to camera. Hold out, this is pretty standard for rendering. Overscan is nice. You can just take a factor of 1.1, 1.2 and overscan the camera. Set range, we've seen the range markers, and I mean this is really basic stuff, right? You can just copy paste that from here while you click in Blender. Material overrides for everything, material overrides for a list of collections, and this is where it gets destructive, as I described. If you have big stuff in your scene that makes your file large and you just want to render a little thing that doesn't need the big stuff, you can actually remove it for that take. If you're using a cloud render farm, you might not want to have such large uploads, for example. This could also be turned around, this whole idea. You could actually not remove stuff, but bring stuff into a take that is not in the work file. So if you have this large Alembic file that you need in your render, you could write a utility that imports it, and then it's only in your take but not in your work file. And then light groups and AOVs for color and value. So you can define these per take. And this is where the utility file ends, but this can be extended in any way. As I said, whatever the Blender API gives you can be done in a take. So if you had like a geometry nodes modifier and you want to do seed wedges, like different versions of one thing with different seed values, you can define a couple of takes in here. Render benchmarking with different render settings, of course, that can all be done really easily. The take system or this workflow works mainly on collections, not on objects. So how would we create another take that maybe takes just these two objects and shows them? Well, objects can live in many collections, right? They are just data blocks. You can link data blocks to as many users as you like, and a collection is just another user. So make a collection, I don't know, call them like this, and then you can grab these and bring them into this collection without removing them from the other collections. So in the outliner, you can just find them and then drag and drop. But as it says, move inside collection, control to link, shift to parent. So let's just do control. And now they are up here, but they're also down here. Okay. Turn everything off. And they're just in this collection now, but they're also still in this collection up here. Another helpful thing, I mean, that's obvious if you know Python, but it's really useful here. If you wanted a variation of a take, you can just inherit the take. Okay, I'll make a new one and call it whatever. Let's just call it var1 for variation. And in here, in the take, I'll just call this function. Now this take is exactly the same as this one. And now I can do other stuff to it. For example, if I'm render benchmarking, I want to try other samples and just copy this in here. Done. Now it's the same as this one, but with different sample settings. Another important thing to understand is that if you use different data blocks that are not in use in your work file, but in use in a take, of course they need a fake user or some user. Best example would be the different worlds. So in here I have a couple of worlds. Just black is just dark, and then different skies, for example. They all need a fake user. So you can call them in a take, of course. This wraps up this little demo. Have fun and enjoy.